What up, ladies and gentlemen? Here with another awesome interview, one that has been in the works for like 6 months, which is pretty crazy to think about. But we finally made it happen. I'm here with none other than Mr. Paul Nicholson. How are you doing?
Very well, yourself?
Great. It's a beautiful day, and I know it's going to be a beautiful day. So your work kind of encapsulated me when I found it because Aphex Twin, and then went through your
Mhm.
whole kind of catalog and everyone you've worked with. So the thing I really noticed was texture. Something you work a lot with is texture, and if it's not a black and white image, it's very, you know, um, I guess it's textured. Like there's no other word to say. So what does texture mean to you, and then how do you employ it in the most effective use?
Well, in a lot of my work, logo type design and typography in general, I tend to work and tend to see my work as being more structural or sculptural. So I'm not necessarily obsessing about legibility or that it follows certain trends. And I think, as well as a lot of my reference points and the things that inspire me tend to be outside of design. I spend very little time looking at other designers' work. So I'm more likely to be inspired by, especially nature, the way that, say, rocks form in a windy desert when it's all sandblasted, or the way that tree roots will wrap around a building, like say in Angkor Wat, when you see the tree roots growing
Yeah,
through
yeah.
the stone walls. So I think that does help in having a really broad reference point. I feel I'm not falling into the trends and the kind of vagaries of what's happening now, pop graphics. And I think long term, where that helps is that if you do something that's really on the money in 1995, by say 1999, 2000, it's going to start looking dated. And it's that classic thing. If you follow too much what's going on, the trends, it will be in fashion, but ultimately go out of fashion very quickly. So I think quite early on, I'd made that decision to, in a way, work to as much as possible within a certain amount of ignorance of what's going on as far as graphic design and fashion in graphics.
I mean, that's a very good outlook on it because you're completely right with pop culture that stuff
Yeah.
goes out of fashion and in fashion, and it's a whole cycle, but it's a very fast cycle. So, what's the point of making something that's only popular for like, a couple years and then it falls
Yeah.
out?
I think, as well as I think anybody that works in any kind of creative medium, there's a kind of sweet spot. If you're too out there, if you're too ahead of the curve, too few people will get it. And obviously, if you're following fashion, well, somebody's already done it, and you're just in their shadow.
Mhm.
So there, there is a need to work to find that balance. I know sometimes I've worked with people, and in early stages of any project, I like to throw in the wild cards and just see what I can come up with. And sometimes people pick up on that, and then sometimes it's like, yeah, I really love this, but can you maybe do this and that?
Yeah, and the wall,
Just
what?
rein it in.
Yeah, the wild cards are really fun though. Like, I understand that some
Yeah,
companies may want to rein it in, but
I mean, it's like the other day you in your intro mentioned Aphex Twin. I mean, I was talking with someone about the album Drug Use and about how at the time wasn't particularly well received, and how over time, I think as people go back to that LP and a newer generation pick up on it, I think people more people get it, and it's kind of sunk in a little. So that is a very great place to be, I think, as a creative person, is that when you initially create something, it isn't necessarily a huge explosion, but like a slow burn. And people who do those slow burn projects are the people 10 or 20 years later um, are seen in a completely different light. I mean, obviously, it's terrible business sense to work in a way where nobody really gets it at its inception. But I think as a creative, you do need to push yourself and push the medium that you're working within, or yeah, we'll just end up in a kind of feedback loop where we're just kind of copying each other.
Exactly. And it's funny you mentioned Aphex Twin. That's kind of related to the next question I was going to ask, which is like,
Yeah.
when you're designing, what type of music do you really listen to?
Um, I have a very broad taste in music, but if I were to kind of make a general categorization, it tends to be without lyrics. Or I'm also a big fan of non-English songs. So I will happily listen away to traditional music, say from Bulgaria or from Japan, where they may be singing about marriages or going to work or just their daily life. But to me, they're the songs of angels because I just hear the tones and the intonation through the sounds rather than what the story is in the song.
Mhm.
So I also love things like movie scores because again, the musicians being brought in to put sound to vision. So quite often, film score music doesn't follow a traditional format, kind of verse, chorus, beginning, end, middle, and it you get these layers and textures of sounds. And as well, because there's exciting scenes in a movie or sad scenes in a movie, the music tends to be more emotive. So, I mean, as a kid, quite early on, I got into bands like, say, The Art of Noise or Brian Eno or Vangelis. I mean, Vangelis, I think the first LP I heard by Vangelis was Albedo 0.39. And even now, when I listen to it, you think, I mean, this is really abstract. And for a piece that was created, I think, in the early 70s, I mean, it's just phenomenal. I mean, people know Vangelis mostly for the Blade Runner soundtrack or Chariots on Fire, but his early work was quite groundbreaking as far as electronics and synthesizers go. And then obviously with Brian Eno with the ambient collection, I mean, these are all 74, 75. So this was the kind of music that I gravitated to when I was 10, 11, 12. And so by the time I got to university at 19, and I was listening to what at the time were pirate radio stations broadcasting all manner of the most cutting edge electronic music, there was a direct correlation to my first kind of passion in music. So what was going on in rave scene, but also what was going on in music outside of the dance floor. So whether it's the KLF Chill Out album or the Orb or Rising High Records, I mean, there was a whole um, group of labels and musicians that were creating everything from super, super ambient kind of space music right through to, ear bleed, kind of gabba and hardcore. So I think it was an exciting time for me. But in regard to what I listen to, I think I will use music to put me into the mood. So, I mean, for example, I worked with Ghostmain, who is kind of, I guess, black metal. People may correct me on the terminology. I mean, there's just too many pigeonholes.
Yeah, yeah.
But as far as I know, it's like black metal. And he approached me when he was working on the Anti-Icon LP. And I think at that point in time, he was kind of bringing in more influence of people like Nine Inch Nails and bringing in kind of a more synthesizer sound. So when I was working on the artwork for him, I would be listening to people like Nine Inch Nails and Ghostmain, obviously. And again, it kind of puts you in the right mental space to find the right shapes and forms that will sit alongside that music. So yeah, you can see the correlation to my interest in film scores, because if you're Hans Zimmer and you're working on June, you've got that film playing all the time, looping and looping and looping, because you want to find the sounds for Arrakis and the sounds for the Harkonnen. And yeah, that's a great way to work.
That's a perfect
But yeah,
example too.
and I mean, I'd be very interested to know if musicians, if they work in reverse, if they're working on music. I mean, are they looking at art? Are they walking in the countryside, being inspired by what they see, or walking around the city at night? I think what's exciting is when you're working in one particular medium, is that you're able to be inspired from other sources, because it just sparks ideas that aren't directly correlated to what you're working on.
Hmm.
So I might find the right shape for a logo, the right kind of form or the right feeling for the typography, but it won't have been from looking in design books. Because if I did that, I'd be inspired by that design and my work would just end up looking like that. So yeah, it all kind of ties together really.
Yeah.
What I listen to and how I work and what inspires me.
Yeah, that also the Dune soundtrack was truly incredible. That movie was amazing and that soundtrack was top notch. Um, but it's very interesting and I completely agree with what you say. I found my first ambient record with Eno.
Mm.
Um, I forget which one it was. I have it in LP like over there. I can't really see it though. But I found this Eno album. It was collaborative and all the names were in German. So I was really confused, but
Yeah.
very interested by it. And I listened to it, and it's like an incredible studying record, incredible to just put your mind at ease, but then also you can pick up on these very subtle repetitions in the music or like mantras almost. They like make it perfect. Then there's a artist named Lossel that I got to interview a couple months back, and he sent me his debut LP, which I have also. So I'm like amassing the collection of ambient, and it's very nice. And I think you are right about how musicians go into beautiful surroundings to find what they enjoy. Like I am a musician with violin and guitar, and I tend to go, I don't write music, but whenever I want to feel inspired, I tend to go outside or go on a hike or a bike ride and just trying to explore new areas.
I mean, in the case of Eno, round about the time he did the ambient LPs, because Eno had been in Roxy Music
Yeah.
and had left the band. Um, and round about the same time, David Bowie was in Berlin. So you've got David Bowie and Eno in Berlin. I mean, this is Berlin, mid 70s. You're only talking about 25, 30 years since the end of World War II. Berlin itself, the western part, is an island of Europe in amongst the Soviet bloc.
Mm.
So it must have been a very strange and exciting place to have lived in. There'd have been all remnants of the Second World War that had been bombed out buildings, and you'd have seen all that stuff still back then. And you're in the middle of the Soviet bloc in this little speck of Western Germany. Uh, but you can see the music that was being produced in Germany from the late 60s, early 70s was very exciting. You can see why people like Bowie and Eno gravitated to Berlin, because Germany was just absolutely cooking in the mid 70s. So there's bands that are well known like Kraftwerk and Can, but you can see Tangerine Dream and a whole host of musicians that were just churning out amazing music. So when I was say 13 or 14, going into record stores, my hometown was small, really small, 60,000 people. So the record shop, by most town standards, was small. So the section where anything electronic would end up in was, say, that wide. So every couple of weeks, I'd go into town, I'd have a bit of money to spend on music, and whatever had been dropped in that slot, I'd have a look at it and I'd take a punt, because this is before the internet, before a lot of these bands would ever get radio time. So yeah, I would take a punt. I would recognize certain names, I'd recognize certain labels. So, for example, with Brian Eno, because he'd worked on EG records, EG recordings, I think there was a deal on an LP, like a sample LP for 50 pence. It's about $half. So I picked it out, and then I found out about Roger Eno and Penguin Cafe Orchestra. And it would just work like that. So, for example, the band Yellow, that became famous for doing "Oh Yeah" in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Uh-huh.
Again, it was one of those things. There's the bargain bin section, and I picked out an LP, a whole LP, I think 50 pence. And it was just a gamble. I didn't know whether it was going to be good or bad, but I get it home and it's like brilliant. I mean, fantastic. So yeah, that's how that's basically how you would find things, back in the 80s. And for anyone from the UK of my generation, they'll always mention John Peel, because John Peel was a radio DJ, and he would usually play, quite late in the evening. I can't remember the times, but it was the slot on the main radio channel in the UK where they played underground music, experimental music, indie music, rock and roll, punk, whatever wasn't getting played on mainstream radio. Someone like John Peel would kind of cherry pick what was going on. So it was through John Peel that I discovered people like the Joy Division, Cocteau Twins, This Mortal Coil, Dead Can Dance. I mean, the list goes on. But without John Peel, my love of music wouldn't have flourished so much. And I think as well is when you have one DJ having to represent a large swathe of music that wasn't in the mainstream charts. Obviously, he couldn't just stick to rock or to indie or
Yeah.
whatever genre. So during his show in an hour, you would hear everything. So what was great is that you couldn't listen to a show like John Peel with a closed mind. So it was through John Peel that I found aspects of like industrial music and noise. So bands like Swans or the Butthole Surfers. And I mean, again, it just goes on and on. And I feel very fortunate for that, because if you had a choice, you'd probably just cherry pick things that you like, or stick to genres you like. But John Peel would kind of, you would have to listen to the whole show. 3 or 4 tracks in succession, you might think, oh, that was shit. I don't want to listen to that band again. But then you'll be surprised, because he'll play something you've never heard before, and it's a type of music you've never heard before. Oh, another band, Wise Blood. So again, these are all kind of. I would imagine your American audience of a certain age will know these names, because most of them were American bands, Butthole Surfers and Wise Blood. But for me, being into graphics, I mean, the Wise Blood LP, Scraping Fetus Off the Wheel, all the bands like this had amazing artwork. So I mean, with the Butthole Surfers, it was only one LP I liked, which was Locust Technician Abortion.
Yeah.
And it's just a really, really interesting LP. And a few years ago, I actually read about the Butthole Surfers, and this was just them experimenting, because their regular sound was very different. So, but that one LP, I mean, blimey, it was on repeat for about a few years in my mid-teens. Just absolutely loved it.
Yeah, for where your generation had that kind of weird radio presenter, I think we have just the internet and where I found so many weird records. Like I have a massive love of Swans. I
Mm.
absolutely love that band and all the stuff they do. I have one of their records. I've interviewed three of their members, working on two
Oh, well,
more. Like I really enjoyed that band and I have fond memories of them because they were the first show I was ever guest listed to, period.
good.
So that was
Yeah.
the first show I ever got like free tickets for. And it's so special walking up to the box office with my ID and being like, I'm on the band's list. I'm on guest list. And I have fond memories of them. And the whole way I found all of these weird bands was just through weird forums and Google searches and YouTube videos and just whatever when I was, 13, whenever I was just bored and just scrolling
Yeah.
around looking for something to do. And then you find
I
this
mean,
like album cover and just dive.
I think the mental desire to discover things doesn't change. I
Yeah.
think technology these days affords you a lot more ease at finding things. We're not just finding things, finding everything.
Yeah.
So it's like when I'll listen to a band and I'll go, I should really find some more of their back catalogue. And to give an example, I'd always been a fan of Music for the Masses by Depeche Mode, which came out, I think, about 87. So I'd been a big fan of that LP, but never really bothered to check out the rest of their music. I go online and you find sites where you can just download everything.
Yeah.
And then you start to realize that there was a whole period that you completely missed out on because you were into other things. Um, and all of a sudden you've got this folder on your machine that is just a huge collection of music. So it's really quite exciting for me, and I still get that excitement finding music even when it's 40-year-old music that from bands that I'd only gotten into slightly when I was a teenager, and then to kind of it's almost like rediscovering them. And I
Yeah.
think as well is because generally speaking, audio equipment is better these days. What's always interesting going back to music that I had when I was a kid is that hearing, say, a high quality recording or certainly a good quality file. Because a lot of the stuff that I would have had as a kid would have been played off vinyl records on a shitty sound system.
Yeah.
So I hear bands now and it's through, $500 Sony headphones and it's a FLAC file. All of a sudden, it's like there's parts of the track you never heard before. Because, my system as a kid there was a crappy British brand called Amstrad. And I mean, they were totally shit sound systems. But as a kid, it was what I got given. But as I say, that again is an exciting aspect to music is to rediscover something you discovered, to rehear those tracks again. And it's like, oh man. Because you suddenly hear that there's all this stuff going on in the background, there's melodies or drum patterns that you just never heard before.
I remember the first time we went into like the special audio store because looking to get my first pair of really good headphones, my only pair of really good headphones. I use them only for special occasions and deep listening. And while the guy was helping me out, he took me to the back room. He was like, "Do you want to hear a $50,000 setup?" And so there's these massive speakers, like you're surrounded by these big speakers. And he asked me what song I wanted to play, and I said, Peter Frampton. Just give me a random Peter Frampton song. So he played one of my favorite Peter Frampton songs, and I realized there are horns way back over there. You can never hear before. Now I can hear them. There's this beautiful bass presence that I never like even imagined there to be. And this whole other world like opens up with better audio quality and technology, which is just so
I
cool.
mean,
It's completely
I know
fascinating.
when I go out now to clubs or to music venues, I think when I was in my teens and early 20s and you went out, the best a sound engineer could do was really just up the power, to give you that power, that kind of oomph from
Yeah.
the sound system. So the problem was is that you turn up the dials, yeah, you'll get the power, but you're going to get distortion and the sound is going to become muffled. But you go out now where rather than just a stack of speakers at the front, you're going to a venue where there's more speakers, there's smaller speakers, but they're positioned everywhere. So when you're on the floor, it's not like the music is ear bleedingly loud, but it completely encapsulates you because the sound is coming from all directions. And obviously, it's all perfectly pitched and, calibrated. So what you get is just this like complete surround sound. So I mean, I don't know much about sound technology, but I guess the sort of leaps that were made with, say, THX 1138 sound systems in cinemas would have then transferred to events and clubs,
Yeah.
because the sound quality now is just, it's so good when you go out, so much better.
It definitely is. And when you're like pushing the power, like with the band, like Swans, it's still extremely
Mm.
clear, no feedback, no like
Yeah.
resistance. Everything's just louder, but still like clear as ice,
Yeah.
which is very cool to see. And
Well, especially in live music, if a stick is hitting a drum or a guitar string's being strung or a keyboard's being played, you want to actually hear the correct frequencies. You don't want it to be muffled. You don't want it to be
exactly.
distorted. You want to hear what the musician wants you to hear, and it be loud and beautiful and give you the goosebumps.
So my next question is, I'm not sure if you heard, but Linkin Park just reunited with a new singer, and their new logo looks incredibly similar, too similar to your work. And I'm glad I'm not the only one who noticed because in the comment section of their Instagram post, one of the most liked comments was Aphex Twin question mark. So, people are noticing that your work is maybe being maybe inspiring others' work a little bit too much, right? So do you take that as a compliment or an insult?
Oh, compliment. You know, if uh, if you're having an effect. I mean, anybody in any creative field wants what they do to be appreciated. And if somebody's that appreciated that it inspires them, I mean, I've seen the logo and it's very interesting because I created a logo where I'd had an A
Yeah.
and I'd rotated it because an A in a triangle, it's equilateral triangle, so it's 360 degrees.
Mhm.
And because the name had an A at the beginning and an A at the end, I'd simply rotated the same A 60 degrees so that and it's very similar in geometry to the LP of the Linkin Park logo.
Yeah.
Now, that logo I'm talking about was never used. So there's no way that they could have been influenced directly by that. But I think within design, when you're working with kind of rules of geometry, so classic triangles, a golden section, all of sacred geometry. I mean, all of these geometric forms, there are fundamentals that are at the root of it all. Just like the way in music you've got the bars and the, you know, octaves. There's certain things that are just universal. So it was interesting to see if people do directly copy. I mean, for example, there's quite a few logos that are obviously referential to Aphex Twin. I mean, again, it's a compliment, just like the way um, Jamie something or other's work. He did the Sex Pistols. I mean, how many times have you seen somebody do a mock Sex Pistols with cut out newspaper type?
Yeah.
So, from a creative point of view, I always think it's like a challenge because what you want to do is great. The next thing everybody wants to copy. You know that ultimately, I'm not gonna get all litigious and start crying into my cup because it's like, oh no, people are ripping me off. Because you as a creative, that's somebody throwing down the gauntlet. It's like, well, come on, do something better. So it from a creative point of view, I like that. I think as well is from the necessity to get known. So if people are copying what you do and it gets recognized as your style, ultimately, um, it just means that you're better known and better appreciated. So I always think that the more times I'm copied, the more doors open for me, because those that want it will always want to go to the source.
Hmm.
So you know, I'm sure there's plenty of people copying musicians. But if you want to hear that band, you go to them. You don't go to a band that sound like them. So you
That is
know,
true.
it certainly doesn't bother me at all.
Very positive way to look at it. And yeah, I think it is
Well,
very flattering.
I think as well is if you look at it more holistically, if things like that wind you up and you wake up every day feeling bitter or angry, well, you'll be the victim at the end because it will just
Exactly.
eat, destroy your soul. You'll be just left a bitter, twisted old person. So no, just run with it, and as I say, just always be one step ahead, because there'll be those that lead and those that follow. So, you know, as long as people are copying me, that's good, you know, because it means
Yeah.
they're back there, and I'm hopefully ahead of them.
Okay. So we are at the last question.
All
Um,
right, okay,
so I'm gonna give a kind of big question and then we'll go from there, okay? I need you to give me three pivotal moments that solidified your understanding that you wanted to do this career. So three pivotal moments in your life that you were like, I want to do this for a living. I want to make this. I want to do this.
okay. Well, mid 80s, there was two designers I was really into. You had Vaughan Oliver at 4AD Records, and you had the Designers Republic. So round about 15 or 16, I was into bands like Cocteau Twins, This Small Called Dead Can Dance. They were all 4AD artists. So they were all on the label. And then round about 15, there was a band from Leeds, which is the nearest city to where I was brought up. So there's a lot of, you know, local regional pride that this band were creating this music I really loved, and they were from Leeds. So they were the Age of Chance, and the first sleeve that the Designers Republic ever created was Kiss for the Age of Chance. And they then went on to create some of the my favorite record sleeves of all time for the Age of Chance. So Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Noise, 1000 Years of Trouble. So really great artwork. And, you know, when I look at it now, it still amazes me that this is mostly pre-computer, that it would have all been hand drawn, went to a printers in the old way on a piece of cardboard with a trace overlay with printer's notes on it. I mean, it's all, as far as I know, pre-digital. And to see it, it's like, wow. I mean, so much work goes into it. So I think from about that age, I knew I wanted to work within the music industry, and I was very focused on that. So I know there was a project in my second year at university to do a record sleeve project, and I just absolutely went mad. I just created so much work. I think there was another time when I was probably 15 and I'd been hand painting t-shirts for myself. And there was a clothing store in my hometown. And the guy that ran it just stops me in the street and goes, "Where's your shirt from?" I says, "Oh, I just hand paint them." So he says, "Look, you know, if I give you some denim jackets and you paint on them, what do you want?" So think at the time I got £50 for a jacket, which in
That's
1985, when
good.
you're 15 and I'm delivering newspapers to make a bit of coin, this was a lot of money. So I was just like super happy. So I think as well as I've always been interested in graphics in fashion. So I've had t-shirt brands, I've worked with a lot of fashion labels, and I've created identities and on-garment graphics for a lot of people. So I mean, those are two very pivotal points about the same time, round about 15, 16. And I think from then on, it was plain sailing. I knew exactly where I wanted to be. Um, I think the timing
Mm.
was perfect because I'd gone into electronic music quite early on, and especially dance music. So I was really into dancing. And I got to London when the rave scene kicked off. So brilliant. It's like, I get off the train, I'd start at university. And when I'm not studying, I'm out going to illegal raves and dance parties and clubs. So it was just fantastic timing. And I got to meet people that ran Knowledge. They gave me my first professional job. So I designed the logo for Knowledge. Then within a couple of weeks of doing that, I did the Aphex Twin logo. So whilst I'm still in my second year at university, I'm already working um, professionally. I'm doing work, it's getting out there, I'm getting paid. I think I did two record sleeves before leaving university. So, and it was like I knew I had to do my A levels to get into
Yeah.
foundation course. I had to do the foundation course to get into university, and I wanted to be in London. So once I was in London, I was meeting the people I wanted to work with. So straight away, everything was set up. I
Yeah.
started a business within 6 months of leaving university. I met another guy called John. We started a company, Prototype 21. So I think having that passion and having that kind of
Yeah.
blink
I,
of view, like foresight, I was like, bang, that's where I'm going.
Perfect. Perfect timing too, because Zoom's about to cut me off. It's been an absolute honor speaking to you.
It's been a
Um,
pleasure.
I think I'll